I had to actually work late, but it was all for a good cause, and I'm really happy. This is really the culmination of a really good week, and maybe one day I'll tell some of you about it. But for right now, it's just kind of to myself. But I have a special guest with me today. My friend, my brother, Tommy Stewart is here. And this, I met him through the Heresy After Hours group of the Heretic Happy Hour. And I consider him a kindred spirit. We've been connecting on a lot of levels almost for almost 2 years now. Well, pretty much
Yeah.
since I was on the Heretic Happy Hour podcast.
Hmm.
Uh, but I connected with you because of your story. You were going through something, and one before we get started too. I like to do this with me and Aaron. What's in the glass, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I actually have a glass, but yeah, this is a one of my favorites, Great Lakes Nosferatu. It's
ooh,
a Imperial Red IPA, one of my favorite styles. It's a brewery here in Ohio, up in Cleveland. But
okay.
I live in Cincinnati, so a little part of me is a little bitter that I enjoy something from Cleveland, but I cope.
Well, I guess like I'm from Detroit,
Mhm.
so the tribe being in the playoffs this year, that warmed my heart, and
Uh,
I love the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and
mhm.
there's a lot I love about Cleveland, and people from Detroit get pissed with me when I say that, but I don't give a fuck. So
There you go.
so
Out of fucks to give. I
yeah,
like
so
it.
I'm drinking this it's Koenig Ludwig wheat beer.
Ah, nice.
And yeah, one of my go-tos. I like the wheat beers, man.
Mm.
But my Pilsner glasses, for some reason, my kids like to drink soda from my Pilsner glasses. So,
Yeah, my son does the same thing. Like he'll like use like my beer glasses. I have a little snifter that
oh
I have sometimes. He'll just like put apple juice or something in it. I'm like, dude,
yeah,
maybe get him his own. But
yeah. So I'm in the process of redoing my office here, and I've got a bar set up in here and a wine rack, and I'm gonna get my own glassware and just keep it in here, except when I need to wash it. So but that's the
nice.
that's the trick. So anyway, Tommy, I want to kick this over to you because basically the way I do this is your show. This is your format. You're going to tell your story, and I'm just going to ask you prompting questions
Mhm.
and just kind of go along for the ride, man. Because you have a fucking incredible story to tell, and I want everybody to hear it because this for you it's a journey through a major ordeal in your life and a journey through, I like to say, through faith.
Through, yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
the only way out is through.
yep. You got to get through it.
Hmm. Yeah, so yeah, you'll definitely probably will need to ask me some kind of prompting questions because I tend to ramble a bit. But but yeah, I guess yeah, hard to even know where to start. I guess with the more recent thing, speaking of ordeal, as of I think early September, I am officially 1 year in remission from a very, thank you, a very highly aggressive stage 4 melanoma. It was a skin cancer. I was diagnosed in, I think, February of 2021. Then went through a bit of an ordeal. Probably get into more details later, but went into it. I mean, I was born and raised a Christian, pretty conservative fundamentalist. Grew up Baptist. Was that way for most of my life, probably until college. Then what ended up going to a little more like progressive evangelical type of church. Having interesting experiences like finding out that there can be Christians who are Democrats. That was like a pretty new
Oh,
experience for me when I was in college. Yeah, I grew up like conservative, pretty much like every sense of the word. But but yeah, and then uh, yeah, went through a couple different, more slightly more progressive evangelical. Slightly went to a pretty large mega church here in Cincinnati that was a little more on like charismatic end.
Mhm.
And then probably about, I'd say 2019 is when I started really deconstructing. Like I had like I said, coming to college and meeting like different types of Christians, I had already kind of started deconstructing some things. Like I wasn't holding like to the strict like literalist like biblical interpretations of things like the creation story. I
Yep.
started, oh, okay, evolution might be real. Okay. Oh, and realizing that, oh, not all these stories were meant to be taken literally. I kind of thought they were. So yeah, I started deconstructing about 2019, including listening to podcasts like yours, like Heretic Happy Hour. I was
Mhm.
really big into like Pete Enns, The Bible for Normal People, Richard Rohr, uh,
Yep.
really Greg Boyd. Yeah, a lot of people like that. And then, so yeah, so by the time I got my cancer diagnosis, I was a universalist. I was fairly progressive. You know, um, but then yeah, at some point, I guess during the process, I mean, I don't know if it's just a just a side effect of being faced with, oh, I might be dying. You kind of
Yeah.
start to like really, really reevaluate, really be honest, like with myself about what do I really believe? Why do I really believe all these things? But yeah, it was, as I say, because yeah, so I guess I can just take you through a little more of the timeline of like from my
Yeah.
diagnosis to.
Yeah. Let's do that. And here's what I want to really zero in on here, Tommy,
Mhm,
is you know facing your own mortality. That's a real motherfucker for anybody,
mhm,
right? That's real shit. But the thing is that you came up conservative Christian, right? So
mhm.
I'm sure you had people praying for you.
Oh yeah.
You were involved in prayer circles, prayer vigils, and all this. Healed in the name of Jesus. All of that stuff.
Mhm.
As you walk through this journey, I want to kind of capture the milestones of your going through, because see, you came out. I don't think that you're quite as aggressive as I am, but you're damn near as vocal.
Yeah, that's something else, can also get into just kind of my approach, because like honestly, like I was a little nervous. Like I wasn't nervous coming on here. I was like super excited to come on and finally get a chance to talk to you and like share my story. But I was a little nervous like sharing it with people because I haven't actually told very many people that I'm an atheist now, even though I basically have been for like a little over a year now, probably. But I can get into that later, more of like kind of how I've approached it. Because I've been very vocal, but not necessarily just flat out saying I'm an atheist. It's been more, well,
Yeah.
here's just things I've been thinking about, and draw your own conclusions almost, kind of. But so like I said, got my cancer diagnosis. It was February of 2021. It was melanoma. I had a growth on the back of my head right here. Like, so if you see from some angles, you might see how
Yeah.
almost looks like part of my head's missing there. But because it was like just a little spot, like a little mole that like the previous summer, like I'm like I have all kinds of moles. I've had a bunch taken off. None of them have ever been cancerous before this, but so I didn't really think much of it. But then it started growing. Finally got in to see doctors. Also got to remember this is like when I first noticed it was like back in 2020. So it was like during COVID. So like getting into doctors was a little more difficult to do back then. So by the time I actually got it addressed and looked at, like the thing had grown to like almost 6 centimeters across.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty nasty fucker. But so finally got it removed in the end of January 2021. Got diagnosed early February. They said, okay, this is a not only is it melanoma, but it also looks like it's a pretty aggressive one. Like for anyone, I don't know if people are familiar with melanomas, but a couple of things about it. It was nodular and it had a NRAS mutation, which made it particularly aggressive and also resistant to treatment.
Hmm.
So, but by the time they found it, it was like the primary tumor on the back of my head. I had a dermatologist remove that, and then but they're also found there was like another little lump just a few inches below on the back of my head. Okay, it looks, and had some scans. So, okay, that's another site where it's at. It looked like it was like next to a lymph node, but hadn't got into it yet, which we were like, okay, it's not in the lymph node. Cool. So I just had surgery to remove more from the primary site to make sure they got all of that, remove the little spot next to the lymph node. And they're like, okay, looks like according to all the scans, we got everything that was there, at least that was showing up. So then they just started me on immunotherapy, just, because I guess that's what's been found to be like the most effective treatment for it as opposed to chemotherapy, which is good because immunotherapy, at least for me, doesn't really have very many side effects. Yeah. But so I started immunotherapy in March that year, but then they were going to set me up with another round of scans. I had an MRI and a PET scan a few months after that just to see, okay, let's just see where we're at, see how the treatment's going. So then that June, we went from, okay, we got everything, to I had a scan showing that not only had it spread, but it was like all through my abdomen. Like I remember on the PET scan, like it didn't even count all the tumors that I had. It just said, okay, one here, several here. There was like, I think a total of 3 in my lungs. There was one all the way down in my leg, like around my lower abdomen. And there was some, it said like there was some like around my heart, like in the tissue around it. And they're like, okay, that's bad. Because like, yeah, so that was in June. So, all right, so we'll change your treatment. So I was on some different immunotherapies, but then in July, I was just in for one of my regular checkups and they noticed a heart murmur. So they're like, oh, we'll probably get that checked out. So I had an echocardiogram and showed, oh, there's also a mass actually inside my heart, which I guess on the regular scans, like things don't show up in the heart very well just because it keeps moving. So you're like with MRIs and stuff, they really only do well with things that are holding still, which, thankfully your heart doesn't hold still. But so they found that. And so then they did a specific cardiac MRI on it. Okay, so this mass, it was about 2 centimeters across. And it was like 60% clot and 40% tumor. So
shit.
Yeah. So then my oncologist was like, okay, so we love immunotherapy for melanoma, but the problem with immunotherapy is it's very effective, but it can take a while. And they're like, you've got a tumor in your heart. We may not have a while. So then they switched me to a very aggressive chemotherapy where I actually had to go to the hospital for a week, for 4 days at a time, where I was like giving it every day. It was kind of an inpatient thing. And so I did 2 rounds of that. And then I did another set of scans. Let's see. So yeah, the chemotherapy, that was in August and just into early September. And then on September 7th, they're all right, let's just do another round of scans, just see how anything's looking. We thought, based on some of my numbers, they're like, hey, it looks like the treatment may actually be starting to work, but we want to see like where you're at. And then we'll see if we need to go back to chemo or just back to immunotherapy. So then I had those scans on September 7th and everything was gone.
Wow.
Like just gone. All that was left was like a little bit of scar tissue in my lungs from the tumors that were there, just because I guess anytime there's ever anything in your lungs, it's just going to leave scar tissue. But yeah, nothing active. And then I had another scan later specifically on my heart to say, yeah, even the mass that was in your heart is completely gone. The blood clot that was there was gone. So.
Okay, so let me stop you there and ask you a question, because you had to, what was your regimen? What was your mental regimen like? I mean, because you're faced with some really daunting prospects here, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're married and you have kids, right? So so you're having to process all of this. Now, again, here's the thing: a Christian listening to your testimony will say, "Well, look at God."
Look at I heard a lot of that. Yeah.
Right. But I want to know. I want to get inside Tommy's head, right? And say, okay, what was it? Because another fun fact about me is that I went through a heart failure issue about 5 years ago, and my ejection fraction had got down to 20%. And this was, at this point, I'm still pastoring, I'm still preaching, and people, I've got people praying and everything, got prayer circles and prayer vigils and all of this other stuff going on, but what I found was that all of the wisdom that I needed for my condition, I had within me. And
Mm.
all I had to do was turn inward, sort of like doing a reverse Google search, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and finding that and so I think about like certain cars. Like one of the things that's really fun now is like these cars have these little hidden features that are
Hmm.
buried like in the infotainment system, or a combination of buttons will
Hmm.
produce some kind of, well, so that's what I'm getting at. i
Mm.
want to i want to find where you found the Easter eggs, where you found the hidden wisdom that got you healed. Because see there, again, all praise and glory to the doctors, right, for their work.
Amen.
but
Yeah.
but what about praise and glory for Tommy? Because that's what I want to get into.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because going for most of the ordeal, like I said, I didn't actually like completely like lose my faith and like become atheist till like after the fact.
Mhm.
Like I said, I went into remission in September. Probably say it was maybe late October. I kind of consider when I kind of officially became atheist. But so during the ordeal, like I still like kind of had some kind of faith, but but one of the things I kept saying like during the whole ordeal that like really kept me going was all the other people in my life. Like my wife, like first and foremost, just was like outstanding. Like she's just such a rock, and like I cannot overstate how huge it was like to have her in my corner and
Yeah.
supporting me. Like she was amazing. But then just like other people, like like I said, obviously I had a bunch of friends and family like praying for me and checking in on me all the time. Um, Doing things for me. I remember, so one of the hardest things was the first time I was in the hospital for chemotherapy. Like one of the days I was there was actually my son's 10th birthday that I had to miss, which was really tough. But we had a bunch of friends who like that night just like came over to our house. They bought presents for him. They threw him a little party. I was like, just things like that. But yeah, as far as like what got me through, because yeah, but for me, as far as like where my mental state was for most of it, I guess some bit of a maybe blessing and a curse. I guess just the way my brain works. A lot of times, like things have a hard time just kind of like really sinking in
Mhm.
that much. So for me, it was like, I mean, yeah, okay, I understood. Okay, I have cancer. This is serious. But for me, it was just like just a day at a time. Just listening to my doctors. You know, doing what they're telling me to do. Going to appointments when I need to, and but yeah, it was. But that's the other thing. Like everything was just happening so fast. I went from diagnosed to okay, we think we got it. Okay, now it's everywhere. And it's in your heart. The
Yeah.
chemo and it's gone. So
Yeah.
all just in a matter of months. So I mean, so really during the time there wasn't really much like processing going on. I guess it was really more after the fact where like a lot of that came from. I guess if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack that.
Okay.
The after the fact, because what I really want to get to, you went through some really, I mean, and I know people that have been through similar situations, and there are all kinds of impacts. There are impacts to family, there's impacts to work, there's impact to finances, and all of that. But when you came out of this, what was the thought process that kind of led you to pass through your faith and I like to say passing through faith on the on the road to logic and reason? How did
Yeah.
that how
Yeah.
did that come about?
Yeah. Like I said, so I had been, like I said, pretty heavily deconstructing to that point where, I mean, by the time I was diagnosed, like I already had like various Christians basically telling me, "Oh, you're not really a Christian anymore," because I had basically given up on things like inerrancy of Scripture. Like I even got to the point where I was like, I don't even know what to think of the Bible anymore. Honestly, I don't know what to think of God. Like I believe in God, but I couldn't tell you like who it is, who he is, or what it is, or
Mhm.
anything. And like I said, I was a universalist, so like hell wasn't even a concern or anything. But I guess even over the summer, like being like in the hospital, like when I was, and when things were looking really bleak, like thinking back on it now, like I think my faith was kind of already like on its way out at that point. Because, but then afterwards, one of the things that really got me thinking was because, like you said, people absolutely were like upon hearing the news that I was in remission, they were like, "Oh, praise God! Isn't God so amazing? Look what He's done." And, which I appreciate, but part of it. But I was thinking a couple thoughts. Like first, like why me? Like not as like kind of a guilt kind of way, but just like okay, understanding that um, okay, I was healed, but that's also because for whatever reason, just in the past few years, treatments for melanoma specifically have just like skyrocketed. Like honestly, like 5, 10 years ago with the diagnosis I got, like I'd probably be dead right now. But
Wow.
because of the advancements in medicine, I'm like, but people are like crediting God for this. And I'm like, but what about all the people who've died of the very same thing I have, like, for centuries probably before
Yeah.
this? And I'm like, just starting to, because probably around that time, I think it was probably shortly after I went into remission, I basically said, okay, I really don't think I'm a Christian anymore, or at least I'm not taking um, like Christianity, like any ideas or thoughts about it for granted. Like I'm just not going to assume anything about Christianity. So once I really started looking at it, I'm like, okay, like, sorry, I just had a brain freeze.
No,
But
it's
yeah,
cool.
just yeah, yeah, but just the idea of like, people will call out when something good happens. Christians will say, okay, well, this is obviously God, you know.
Mhm.
But for all the people, I mean, because I've had you know several friends and family who've died of cancer.
Mhm.
So it's like, did God not love them? But you bring that up, and then it's like, oh well, God's mysterious. He works in mysterious ways. Like, well, just a second ago, you were telling me He obviously healed me,
Right.
but now He's mysterious. Like that just didn't add up. So yeah, and I can't remember like I couldn't recall like the entire like train of thought from how I got to Christian to not Christian to atheist, but there were just so many little things like that along the way. But
I don't know. I have this
yeah.
theory
Hmm.
and I've really been kind of playing with this theory. Well, I won't say theory; it's more like a hypothesis now. It really hasn't coalesced in real theory yet. But it's that why do people insist on maintaining deconstruction?
Yeah.
Right? In other words, that deconstruction becomes a way of life. It becomes an end unto itself. And I
Hmm.
really believe that there should be an end of deconstruction. And in other words, there's a hard point where you say, okay, I've stripped away everything that is unnecessary. I've stripped away everything that isn't working. I've stripped away, torn down everything that doesn't edify me.
Hmm.
And now I can get to the point where I can build something up from there, right?
Right.
But there are people that I mean, honestly, they're actually making a living on deconstruction, because they're
Hmm.
keeping people in the deconstructing loop and saying, you just have to keep on going through it, keep on processing it. But I've said this, that when you demolish a building, you don't continue demolishing it after it's been demolished. Or if
Hmm.
you disassemble a car or some other mechanical device, you don't keep disassembling it once it's fully disassembled, right? At,
Hmm.
at some point, you have to say, okay, now I'm going to try to reassemble this better or rebuild this better. Uh, but
Hmm.
but but the act of disassembling it or unpacking it or demolishing it, all of that's done, right? So
Right.
this is what one of the things that I saw that really endeared me to you, your approach to this is that basically it seems like you hit a point. There was somewhere in your deconstruction where you said, "Oh shit, okay, here I am. I've hit the bottom. I've hit the wall, or I've reached the point where this no longer exists in
Mhm.
my mind or in my life like it did. Now, what do I build in its place, or do you
Yeah,
build something in its place? That's
right.
a better question.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess it wasn't necessarily like just like one wall that I hit, but maybe like a few at a time. So as I'm deconstructing, I guess what it basically came down to is like once you're deconstructing so far, it's like you realize like as people will deconstruct so far, like, okay, well you don't need to hold on to any of these things, but maybe just this one thing. And then someone else will say, no, you don't need to hold on to that, maybe just this. But then
Right.
so basically heard people saying, okay, you don't need to hold on to the Bible. You don't need to hold on to like prayer for like healing or whatever. You don't need to hold. Some people would even say like you don't even necessarily need to hold on to like believing that Jesus was God.
Mhm.
Basically, so I'm seeing like through deconstructing like all these things is really just realizing. So I apparently don't need to hold on to any of this. So I'll just try not holding on to any of it. Just and and then just allowing myself to actually critically examine, why I was holding on to it in the first place,
Mhm.
and was there anything even there to hold on to? And yeah, just realizing, yeah, this like I really only, I guess the way, and if for anyone who's familiar with Dan Dennett,
Mhm.
uh, one of the infamous Four Horsemen, the way he put it is like there's a lot of Christians who don't necessarily actually believe in God, but they believe in belief.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
I was
one.
like, and I realized I was believing in belief just because I hadn't for my whole life. Like I said, it's all I ever knew. So I never really even considered any alternatives. So, but speaking of people like Dan Dennett, whether it's like him or like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, or whoever,
Mhm.
growing up, I was just told all these atheists, like they
Yeah.
they don't know what they're talking about. They have no answers. So I was actually like really interested in into like Christian apologetics, and then but I would only be hearing basically like the atheist side, like from the apologist side, who would say, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, they don't have any answers for all these arguments we have." So then I was like, well, maybe I'll check them out, see what they actually have to say instead of listening to just what the apologists have to say, and it wasn't long, like literally I would go on, I would look up debates like between like Sam Harris and William Lane Craig and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and I was like, holy shit, these atheists actually have a point. It wasn't even like a conscious thing. It was like I would just be listening to the debate and just going, I'll just see what they have to say. But then I found myself just at a very like gut level, like kind of rooting for the atheist in the debate. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? Like, realizing, oh, they actually do have answers to all this stuff that the apologists are talking about, and so I was like, okay, so because that's honestly like in any time that I've like changed my opinions on things, whether it was religion or faith or politics. I said I grew up very like conservative Republican, but no longer like if anything right now I'm probably call it anarchist or voluntarist, but even that starting to change, but
Yeah.
possibly. But basically I would research something and I would just keep like either reading or listening to different opinions until I got to a point where I would hear something and say, okay, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
And kind of that's where I got to like, like I said, I'd listen to all kinds of like atheist or skeptic voices and being like, yeah, all these like Christian apologetics are just based on. I found that like also started learning about different logical fallacies that I'd never really learned about before.
Mhm.
Things like I found like pretty much any Christian apologetic I found pretty much relies on question begging, which I also found
Mhm.
out because that's a term I found people I wouldn't say misuse, but there's like a colloquial version of like begging the question, but then like the
Yeah.
actual technical version, people usually think it just means, oh, that makes you ask or raises the question, but it really means like assuming the truth of your conclusion, like
Yeah.
in your argument. So like one popular one I would hear would be, oh, of course there's evidence for God because God is the source of all things that are good. So if you find something good, that's evidence for God. Like, well, that's only if you're assuming the truth of God is the source of all good
Right.
to begin with. but like lines like that, I my whole life, I was, totally bought into and but but yeah, I remember yeah, like so then I've another thing I found like as I was like kind of rethinking a lot is and researching things is learning that there's actually like names for a lot of things I'd been thinking. Like I only recently, or a year ago or so, discovered the concept of divine hiddenness. You're
Mm.
familiar with that one?
No, this enlighten me. I think this is my first time hearing this.
Yeah. So, and this is actually something I even struggled with while I was a Christian. But it's basically just a question of, okay, why is God so hidden? Like, if he's supposed to be so interested in having a relationship with us, because especially if you take these three things about God, that he is omniscient, he knows
Mhm.
everything. If he's
Omnipotent,
omnipotent, that's the word, thank you,
all
all
powerful.
powerful, and if
Mhm.
he's all loving, if he's all those things, then he knows who I am. He's capable of making himself known to me. And if he loves me, then he apparently wants to make himself known to me, especially, and I say especially if you bought into the concept of hell and if you're not saved, you go to hell. But even like as a universalist, it's still key, like knowing God, whether or
Yeah.
not it has any bearing on your afterlife. So just looking at like, so if God is able to and wants to have a relationship with me, and if the stakes are so high on it, why is he not making it so completely like undeniably obvious?
Right.
Because like that's something like even as a Christian, I would like talk to like friends about, and I'd be like, like why isn't God so obvious? And people are like, well, of course he's obvious, and they do like the usual, oh, look at all the beautiful creation
Trees,
and like your
rise, all of
look
that.
at the trees, and that no, I mean like obvious, like he just like shows up like right
Yeah.
here says, hi, I'm God, in whatever form it could be, obviously apparently he did it with Jesus, a couple thousand years ago. He talked to people like Moses and Abraham, like
Yep.
where'd he go? Like
Yep.
so, but yeah, so because I guess when it comes to issues like why people leave the faith. I found, things like the problem of evil seems to be like the big one, which I mean, that's big, but for me, it was divine hiddenness. Because I think even the problem of evil, I think if you really like kind of drill down on it, it's really only a problem because of divine hiddenness.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to believe that all the suffering or whatever or the evil that happens in the world like has a purpose, like okay, well then where's God to tell us what it is? If he would enlighten us, then the problem of evil wouldn't be a problem, and if he'd show up, then divine hiddenness wouldn't be a problem.
Well, you know what? One thing that was a big issue for me was the lack of Christian agreement.
Mm,
You
yep.
know, because if God is this really immutable, unchangeable thing,
Hmm.
then that would mean there's no disagreement on like
Yeah.
for example, an ounce of gold is an ounce of gold. I don't care where you go. A diamond is a diamond. I don't care where you go.
Right.
A battery is a battery. I mean, there are certain
Hmm.
things that we know what this is. We know what it does, and there's very little disagreement.
Hmm.
about what it
Yeah.
is and what it does. But it's like when it comes to Christianity, well, uh, God is love, but God is wrath. Oh no, 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 no. God is love, period. Oh no, no,
Hmm.
no, no, no. Wait, no. God is wrath, period. And we have to
Hmm.
quench that wrath. So there's 42,000 Christian denominations
Hmm.
worth of disagreement.
Yeah, and how many different versions of the Bible, not
Yep.
just translations, but like which books.
Right.
And so, I mean, so I can understand, people being people, there's going to be disagreement. But so it's not that you wouldn't necessarily expect disagreement, but you would expect God to clarify things for us, at least
Exactly.
every now and then.
Exactly. At least for Christians. Now,
Yeah. Hmm.
this was another thing. I got to throw this out here because, you know, people that are not Christians struggle. They struggle financially, they struggle with relationships, they struggle with business, they struggle with themselves, right?
Hmm.
But then when you look in the Christian community, people struggle with the same things. Now, I was like, okay,
Hmm.
if God is so suchy much, then maybe by being affiliated with him, associated with him, or in him, as Christians like to say, that he clear all that shit up, right? That okay, now that you're and the typical argument is, well, Jesus said, in this world you'll have tribulations, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. Okay, so if he's overcome the world and the world is your problem, then that means that in him there should be no more problem. And
Right.
Christians abuse that as a safety valve for why God doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, that's one thing I found like in Christian apologetics is like there's basically like an answer for everything
Yeah.
that may or may not actually be an answer. It's yeah, it's they basically made it like just unfalsifiable,
Yeah.
which I know like
Well,
I
and
know
that totally violates the logic and reason
right.
and the scientific method, because science by definition is falsifiable. Everything is
Mhm.
falsifiable, right?
Right. Oh,
It can either be proven true or it can be proven false in light of newer and better evidence.
right. Oh yeah, I mean that's another thing like I'm also only recently, I guess, finally, and at least in some branches, like really even learning about science because I also went to like very like fundamentalist like Christian school growing up,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
kindergarten through high school. So learning, young Earth creationism, Darwin and evolution, that's all evil, and like listen to people like Ken Ham, debunk it,
Yeah.
and but so and but then now people saying like oh well God is like he's beyond science the stuff like that well science can't prove or disprove God but to me I was like okay well if something can't be if God can't be like shown by science is that a weakness of science or is that a weakness of the claim
Mm,
because the more I've learned about science and like what it really is like when it boils down to is science is really just basically how we know stuff.
right.
So if it can't be shown scientifically, then is it even a thing?
Right.
So,
Yeah, I have three overarching criteria, right? One is it tangible?
mhm,
Can I observe it with my senses, or can it be instrumented, right? Because some things you can't, like for example, you can't quantify um, ultraviolet light without some instrument, but
mhm,
it is quantifiable, is
mhm,
tangible either by senses or by instrumentation. The second thing is. Is it repeatable, right?
mhm,
Can we make this happen over and over again? So it's like tangible, measurable, and repeatable. Those are
mhm.
the three criteria.
Yeah.
And when I look at, they say, well, you can't measure God. Well, why not?
Mhm,
It's like
yeah.
we don't know the ultimate vastness of the universe, but we do have a measure of calculating distances in the
Right.
universe. We have the light year measurement, for example. So there has to be some way of observing it, of measuring it, and whether or not it's repeatable. Because people say, "Oh, well, prayer works. Prayer works because I prayed and I got healed." Okay, great. Then what about the 20 other people that went through the very same thing? And I
Hmm.
always tell people that if you want to find out whether or not God exists or not, all you have to do is go to the cancer ward of any children's hospital, or for any hospital for that matter,
Hmm.
because you have people that are praying all the time. And I would say that out of the people that pray versus the people that don't pray, that the death rate is probably about the same, if not,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So
Because they say, well, okay, I could, even if like God himself was like unmeasurable and undetectable by science or whatever, it's like, okay, even if like I grant you that, but if he actually interacts with real people in the real world,
mhm,
those interactions are real things that should be measurable. And
exactly.
they've done studies on prayer. Or I remember there was this one where not only did it show that people who were prayed for or not prayed for, there wasn't really that big a difference in outcome, except people who were prayed for and were told that they were prayed for actually did
Got
worse.
worse. Yeah, the Harvard study.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I kind of jokingly tell people, like, pray for me if you want, just don't tell me. Because I mean, yeah, because just anecdotally, this is actually something that just occurred to me today, when I was kind of thinking, kind of going through the whole like cancer process again, like that whole timeline. It's like, because I did, I mean, obviously the whole time I had like friends and family praying for me, which,
Mhm.
again, I don't want to make it at all sound like I don't appreciate that, because I appreciate the hell out of all of that. Because even if I disagree with where a person is, I still know, like, from where they're coming from, like that is their language for telling me that they really love me and care about me. So I receive all that.
Yeah.
But there was one point, it was I think it was during the spring, so it was after my diagnosis, after I had my surgery and they started treatment, but like before they'd found out that it had spread everywhere. I actually had some friends, like a very good friend of mine, and then like a couple other people I kind of knew but didn't really, like, they said, okay, we want to come over and like pray for you. Like at that point I was still a Christian. I was like, but I was still, but at that, even at that point I was like, I don't know. I mean, I used to be like super into this, but it's a little weird. But yeah, sure. Friend of
Yeah.
mine cares about me, wants to pray. I'll go through it. So I actually had people come over to my house, and over like probably almost an hour, like talking to me and praying for me. Just like, and it was overall, like I said, there were a couple parts about it that, like, during being part of my deconstruction process, it was like, as they're like praying for me and we're doing like different prayers and like they're having me say different things, that was one of the things that kind of really drove home to me. It's like, yeah, this is really not where I'm at anymore. but but like I said, still appreciated it, all of it. But now I don't actually necessarily look at it this way. But if you're gonna take the anecdotal evidence of things like, well, I prayed for this person and they were healed, therefore God. The way my timeline went was, people prayed for me, then I got much worse. Then I lost my faith. Then I was healed. So if you
Wow.
want to, draw some conclusions from anecdotal evidence, what are you going to do with that?
Right.
So, and and I actually had a little fun. This was probably a little devious on my part, but um, so this last spring, so kind of back up. So like with melanoma, even though I'm in remission now, they still basically treat me as if I'm stage 4, just
Mhm.
because the chance of recurrence is so high. Like just with melanoma in general, but also there were several factors about my melanoma that, like, things like I said, it had an NRAS mutation, it was nodular, my tumor was ulcerated. So basically all the points are like, yes, this makes recurrence more likely. But So I'm still on immunotherapy treatment, just going to be on that indefinitely. And I get quarterly, full body scans, or like I call them, my quarterly power naps. It's like the only chance I get to like just by myself in a tube,
Yeah.
with some music playing. It's pretty nice. But back in the spring when I had my scans, I did find like a little like blip or something in one of my lungs. Now it
Yeah.
was like much smaller than any of my tumors had been. But I was like, and even my oncologist at the time, like when the scan came back, she's like, okay, this is probably nothing. It's probably just a little inflammation from, maybe you had a little allergy or something, But, obviously because you're you and your situation, we're going to be ultra paranoid about it. Make sure we keep an eye. So, and it did turn out to be nothing. I don't want to leave anyone hanging there, but I was like, and like I said, I think it was an honest question, but like I said, a part of me was feeling a little ornery about it. But it's telling people, okay, so for all the people, and I actually like posted on Facebook. I think you saw it and responded to it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That I wanted you to talk about the post, because
Yeah.
that really triggered some people.
Yeah. So I basically just asked, okay, so for all the people who were like so sure that like God healed me because he loves me, and this is like such an obvious sign. So I said, okay, my last scan just showed this little blip like showing up in my lung. Now it's like super small, like to kind of put it in perspective. I don't know what the measurements actually mean, but I remember on the scans where my tumors did show up, like they measure like basically how lit up it is. They were like a 7, and this thing was like a 2. So, but I was like, okay, this little thing showed up. And like, so if this turns out to be something and my cancer's back, and that's the other thing, like if melanoma, like if it comes back, like I'm probably screwed. So I'm like, okay, then basically just putting it out there, like, okay, then how do you interpret this? If you were so clear on me being healed, okay, this was God, then if this is it coming back, then what does that mean?
Right.
And I got some, trying to be charitable here, I guess got some non-answers. But, this whole time I'm trying to like watch, how I say things, but because also just recognizing, like even just like a couple of years ago, I was in this very same place. So just remembering, don't want to be hypocritical, but yeah, because I know like if I was, like I said, even just a few years ago, if someone else had asked me, I would want to respond, and my response would be just as well. You can't really say, and yeah, these are tough things to think about, and like all this. So I probably would have answered the same way a lot of these people did, but like, yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said before, it's like just that whole thing of, when things are looking good, God's obvious, but when things are, going against what you would normally think would happen or what a loving God would look like, it's like, well, all of a sudden he's mysterious again.
It's like
Yeah.
God playing hide and seek with you.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many that are now like frustrating responses to things like, whether it's divine hiddenness or the problem of evil. Like, I don't know if you want to get into many of those, but like probably the one that irks me the most is the free will argument.
Yeah.
Like when people say, well, if God showed himself to us, like that would somehow violate our free will. Like, as if that's like an unloving thing to do. Cause also that's a place where I was at, was like familiar with people like Thomas Ord in his book, God Can't. That was like his whole approach was, okay, God like does love us and he would like intervene to like stop all this evil stuff from happening, but and I don't know where he actually, whether it's Ord or other people like Greg Boyd also say things like this. So I don't know where they actually get this idea, but the idea that love just does not and cannot coerce. So God would stop, these people from doing these evil things, but that would be violating their free will. I mean, whether or not we even have free will, but that's, I don't know if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But
Well, no, like I want to touch on that for a minute because
yeah.
this is so funny. People will talk about free will, and if God is truly omniscient, that He knows the end from the beginning, then
Mhm.
there can't be anything like free will
Yeah.
because He knows what you're going to do or what every possible outcome is.
Hmm.
So basically, and I always said that and I hate that I've come to this conclusion, but I said the most intellectually honest flavor of Christianity is Calvinism.
Yes. Hmm.
Because it's like,
Yeah.
if God knows everything from the beginning to the end, then some people have to be
Yeah.
predestinated.
Yeah. And I think Calvinism actually has the best response or solution for the problem of evil. It's that God is just evil.
Yeah,
Done.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But as far as like, because people will say, okay, God does know the future, but that doesn't mean it's predetermined. But like, okay, but think about this. I mean, I'm not, like I said, I've only in the past like year or so actually got into more in depth and things like philosophy. So forgive me, anyone, if I'm like misusing terms or if I'm just, talking on my ass or whatever. But at least as far as I can see, okay, so if God knows the future, that means you can't know something that isn't real. Like if you know something, it's there.
Yeah,
So if he knows the future, then that means there is a future to know.
right.
And say, well, that doesn't mean, and you could say, well, it doesn't mean he actually predetermined it. And like, okay, but then but who's in charge of what happens if not God?
Right.
So then it's okay. Then if there is a future to be known, then it's predestined
Yeah.
or it's predetermined. And yeah, I mean, uh, there was something else. What else were we talking about?
I mean, we've been covering a lot of stuff, but like
Yeah.
we're talking about, like but let's do this because I don't want to keep you too long, and
Oh,
we've gone
good.
about an hour. So this is where if you're looking at your screen, you should be able to see the chat
Hmm.
in real time. So what I like to do is I like to go through all of the, go through some of the comments. So what I'm going to do is because you're the guest,
Hmm.
you can scroll through the comments and kind of respond to them as you see fit. And what I'm going to do while you're doing that is I'm going to copy the link and share it out with everyone, and if they want to join in.
All right.
So
It's kind of looking through here.
yeah, feel free to scroll through the chat and
All right.
respond to anybody that you like.
Kyle Butler, my dudes, what's up? What's up, Kyle?
Kyle said something too. He says God is hood all the time, and all the time God is hood. I
I saw that.
I
Amen.
love that one.
Oh yeah, one other thing I was wanting to mention. So I guess to kind of sum up where I am, with once I decided, or I don't know if decided to be atheist. That's probably not really accurate. It's kind of an accident, really.
Yeah, you just kind of
But
land there.
yeah, but it's kind of funny. As an atheist now, I have a life verse from, I think it's from Romans, and this isn't the original intent of what Paul was writing, but Paul played pretty fast and loose with some of the Old Testament, so I feel like I can return the favor and play pretty fast and loose with what he wrote. But when he wrote, "Let God be true and every man a liar," so basically, the way I view that and enact it is, okay, if God wants me to know who He is, or she is, or they are, or whoever,
Hmm.
then they can let me know. But like when it comes to like all the things that people come up with to tell me like why God is the way He is, it's like like to me it's indistinguishable from, I wouldn't say that they're just making it up, but it's just like thoughts from your head. Like I said, even like with Thomas Ward and this thing with like, well, God can't like intervene and coerce, because like, okay, well, where are you getting that?
Right.
I don't see that in the Bible anywhere. If you're going to take that as any kind of authority, and I know he probably wouldn't, but then, well, if it's not from the Bible, then where is it from?
Right.
You could say, well, it's from my head. So then you're either left with you have the Bible as your authority, but then a lot of Christians who have deconstructed like past the Bible is like, well, it's the Spirit within me. It's like, okay, well then that's indistinguishable from just your own head.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm like, so I mean, I'll still talk to people like about like what are their thoughts, what are their explanations for things, but at the end of the day, I mean, I like how if you're familiar with Matt Dillahunty.
Yep.
Yeah, people have asked him like, what would convince you that there is a God? And I love his answer. What's up, Matt?
Hi.
Is that your co-host?
This is my co-host. Yeah, I think I mentioned before I have a podcast. It's called 3 Beer Gospel. But first, Matt, let me finish the point. What
Okay.
Matt Dillahunty says is like, I don't know. Like, honestly, I don't know what would make me believe in God, but if there is a God, God knows what that is. And if he wants me to believe, he'll let me know. But I've kind of like got to the point where, like, okay, what would make me believe in God? God.
Yeah.
It's like, what makes me believe that the sun rises? The sunrise. What makes me believe in Mount Everest? Mount Everest, it's right there. Yeah. So yeah, speaking of my podcast, I co-host with where am I pointing? This guy right here. Yep. This is Matt. It's called 3 Beer Gospel. We started a couple years ago.
Now, before I let Matt have the floor, because thanks for joining, Matt. I really appreciate you being here. Melissa Taylor Thomason. I don't know if she's a friend of yours. I don't know if she's. I don't recognize her name. But she says, "Do you reject the idea that there's a creator entirely, or just the modern religious version of God which American Christianity has popularized?" So I will turn it over to you first, Tommy, and then Matt, I'll give you a chance to chime in on that one, because that's a meaty question.
Yeah. Hey, Melissa. Thanks for the question. I guess for the two parts, I guess I would say I do reject the not just American, but any kind of Christian version of a creator. Like, yeah, if I'm honest, I do reject that. But as far as like any kind of creator, it's not that I reject that. I just don't believe in one.
Yeah.
So, like, I consider myself an atheist, but if you've seen like the quadrant, like I would consider myself an agnostic atheist. You know, they're not two different terms that can go together. It just means I'm not claiming to know that there's no God. I just don't believe there's one, and I'm willing to be convinced. But
I'm an agnostic atheist.
Yeah.
Right. So, Matt, what do you think of that? I'll let you answer that, and then chime in with your own thoughts.
Well, right now I'm trying to switch from observer to participant, and my brain's a little slow getting there. No, I don't believe in like a being that's a creator. There could be. I don't see evidence for one, and I don't know how there could be something separate from creation that creates creation. I think if anything, it's a circular cause where something at the end of the loop is the motor that starts the beginning of the loop. And so it's kind of an eternal function. I also think that if there is a creator, it would basically be possible for us to know anything about the creator, because they'd have to be completely outside of the system we live in and just so foreign to us. It'd be like trying to figure out so there's like three, maybe 4 dimensions of time is the fourth. And then it'd be like trying to figure out something in the 12th dimension. Like, we can't even draw that. So like, how do you begin to try to figure it out?
Well, I would counter that with this, like in quantum physics, that in order for the model for quantum mechanics to work, it assumes at least 11 dimensions. That's the assumption of quantum
Okay.
physics. So there's something broader, but the thing is that even though these dimensions, we can't comprehend them with our natural understanding, but there are mathematical models that suggest their existence, right? In other words, you
Mhm.
can't prove it. It's just like warp drive, for example. We know the math behind warp drive, but we don't have the means to actually fabricate it, right?
Mhm.
So there are things that even though we cannot perceive, we can still know. We have some idea because either there is a scientific method that either explains it, or there's some math that says, okay, here's the possibility of it, right? And we can when someone proffers an equation or a theory, that it is something that has been tested and proven repeatable,
Mhm.
right? So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because
Yeah.
this, we can't. There's no mathematical model for God, and
Yeah.
one of the things that I trip out on this, because people say, well, the finely tuned universe, the finely tuned Earth, right? And here we are with Tommy in between us, right? The suffering from melanoma. Where does melanoma come from? The sun, right? So
Mhm.
it's like that throws out your finely tuned universe. Our source of light causes cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just look at how most of the universe is completely empty and devoid of life. But yeah.
Yeah.
But
Or
yeah,
how
but while
the
yeah,
universe conspires to kill us.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, seriously, like if even on our own planet, like if you're just dropped, like even just on the surface, and like 99% of the places on the surface of the earth, if you're just dropped there, you'll probably die within a few minutes.
Yeah.
But real quick, I just wanted to shout out to Matt. Like I said, he's my podcast co-host. It's called Three Beer Gospel. You can check it out. I'll try to put a link in the comments or something afterwards. But just for him particularly, because I talk about my journey and like with everything, and it's kind of became a running joke. Like anytime I would show up to places, or a lot of times it'd be with Matt, and I say, yeah, it's Matt's fault. I'm here. But that's basically my deconstruction journey. Like he's the one who got me started on it, and then when we decided to start doing the podcast together, because when we started it, we were still like in the whole like deconstructing, but still Christian, more progressive. But then like during the course of the podcast, I remember we were both basically going through basically the same like transition from kind of like Christian to post-Christian to atheism, kind of basically at the same time, like with each other. And so yeah, just talking about things that kind of helped me like process things, or in my whole journey and process, Matt right here, just my conversations with him. But so yeah, I promise I won't say the thing that always makes you cry. But if you want to hear that, listen to the podcast. That's for a plug. But yeah, I kind of joke about like the way the podcast is format. Like I said, we're hoping to start trying to do it more often, even like having guests, kind of like you're doing. Hopefully, like our next one, we got a guy lined up. But kind of, it's, if you're familiar with, as far as like the format of it, we basically, like, we've been friends for years. Like I don't even remember exactly how long or why we started hanging out, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
But we would just hang out all the time and just have talks, kind of a lot like this, over varying topics. And then we was like, when we wanted to like invite more people to like to hang out and have the conversations with us, but we just kept having a hard time getting people like with schedules. And they're like, so let's just start recording it and put it out there, and then people can listen. That's basically the feel of it. So like if you're familiar with your man Matt DiStefano and the podcast he had, Bonfire Sessions, it's like a lot like that. And we kind of accidentally like really ripped off of it, because like that podcast, the two hosts are a guy named Matt. I keep forgetting which finger I'm pointing. A guy named Matt and a guy with cancer, or had cancer.
Yeah.
Like Mike, which he's apparently in recovery now too. So
Yep, he's in remission from what I hear.
yeah, which is awesome. So we didn't mean to rip him off in that way, and I'm particularly sorry about that one. But
yeah, I wrote the forward to their book, by the way. So
what's that?
I say I wrote the forward to their book.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've read some of their, like, I think I got a copy of Spring, which which was really cool. But yeah, so if that, but I'll say that's kind of lucky for me, I guess, the both of us, that we were on a podcast together, but we were both going through things kind of the same way. So we were both still kind of on the same page. So like the podcast has definitely changed, but at least we didn't have to worry about, okay, well, we're in completely different places. What's the podcast now? What are we going to talk about now? That would have been its own challenge. But yeah, we were fortunate that, we were both going through. I mean, it's not that we're in exactly the same place. So, the conversation's still interesting, but
yeah. That's kind of like what I'm doing here is that what I discovered in my journey into atheism is that there are people out here that are going through. They've deconstructed their faith, and they've reached ground zero, and they don't have anything to believe in, but they have something they have to say. They have thoughts in their head, words in their heart, and so what I'm hoping to do through this show is to give people like that a voice, and just to allow people to share their stories and let everyone know out here that they're not alone. Because this is something I found out, and this is really, I know at least 12 pastors that are atheists. Now they can't say that they're atheists, and I'll never tell any of them that I know that are atheists.
Like currently pastors or
currently pastors.
Wow. Yeah.
Because the thing is basically somebody said this. One of my followers on my public page said that that honest theologians become atheists. And I thought that was one of the deepest, simplest statements I'd ever heard. Because if you understand theology from an anthropological standpoint, a geographical standpoint, a cultural standpoint, or a philosophical standpoint, and then you understand the historicity of how the Bible came to be, and when you converge all of this, there's only one intellectually honest conclusion to come to. I mean, you can dance around it and you can flirt with it all you want, but at the end of the day, honest theologians become atheists. I mean, I think I'm going to make that my mantra.
Because I do remember you saying, like, you haven't fully deconstructed until you've at least considered atheism.
If you haven't at least flirted with it, you really haven't deconstructed. All you've done is engaged in an elaborate exercise of turd polishing, I call it.
Yeah, because that's one thing I got even like a little frustrated, even with like more like progressive Christianity and like that deconstruction thing. It still seemed like there was a line, like there were a couple lines. Like, okay, well, obviously you have to deconstruct past this point. Like, you can't consider yourself like a progressive Christian or deconstructing. Like, say, if you still think that homosexuality is wrong or transgenderism is wrong, or that women shouldn't preach, but it's like, okay, this is great. Okay, you got to pass this line. And to me, like when I first started deconstructing, it was like, okay, I've crossed this line of like where I used to be, and now it's like all open. But then I found out, no, there's a wall on the other side too, apparently. At least with some people, it's not necessarily universal, but yeah, with some, it's like once you start questioning some things, it's like, well, no, we can't question that. It's like, well, yeah.
And the reason is usually a logical fallacy, I've noticed too.
Yeah.
Even on, I don't want to say his name, but you mentioned him earlier. There's an author and a podcaster that I really enjoyed, and then recently I listened to his podcast again, and I didn't totally agree, but he was making a lot of sense still. And then he got to a certain point where he just started looping back on his reasoning, and I got really disappointed because it was clear that was his wall.
Yeah,
like he wasn't going to question past that point, and he wasn't letting himself see that he had chosen a wall. To him, it just seemed like that was that was that was the next step in the logic.
Yeah.
And I don't get how I was there, and I don't understand how I was there at this point. Like, I don't remember why it was appealing, or I just wanted it to still be true as I thought it was true before. That's the only thing I can come up with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happens is like you get so wedded to your beliefs. And like Tommy said, you believe in belief. And it's really hard to deconstruct from that. But I like to say this too, that progressive Christians like big butts more than Sir Mix-a-Lot.
But yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was another. I think it's going back to something else we were talking about. That was another one of my frustrations. Like, I would be in, groups, Derrick, what group, Facebook group I'm talking about, like talking with like progressive Christians. And I remember one time just asking, because that's one criticism that a lot of atheists get is like, well, you're only attacking this kind of Christianity. And like, you're completely discounting like all these other Christians that believe differently. So I just asked them, okay, what is Christianity?
Mm-hmm.
If you're telling me I'm attacking it wrong or I'm not addressing the proper version, like, what is it? And I got, for as many people as answered, I got that many different answers. I'm like, you could ask 100 different Christians what Christianity means, and you'll get 300 different answers.
Well, it's like I like to pick on my buddy Keith Giles, right? And Keith is one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. I think
awesome.
he is really an awesome human being. And so I say Keith is not a Christian, even though he holds to a lot of the Jesus narrative. And I can prove it with evidence, right? That he's not a Christian. Because when Keith says something that runs contrary or runs afoul of mainstream Christianity, other Christians who consider themselves quite progressive come after him. So what I say, I've said this to Keith and I said it to Matt and I say it to like a lot of other people. You guys aren't really Christians. You're outliers. You're people that see something good in Jesus, but as far as a thought paradigm, right? But in reality, in terms of practice, you're as different from a Christian as a Satanist is from a Christian, right? And so, I really applaud people like Keith and Matt, because they're out there, helping people to navigate the waters of the separation of belief from unbelief, right? But I tell these guys, and I've said that to them directly. You guys aren't Christians. You guys are something else. You're purple unicorns. I don't know, but it's not definitely not the mainstream, because I remember Keith wrote a blog post about whether the considering the possibility that there is no God, and the blowback that he got from that was absolutely insane. And I'm like, poor Keith, he's now he's like in damage control mode, right? He's got the buckets and he's bailing out water because he's taking on water. But the thing is that what he did was he pushed the envelope, and he caused people to think beyond their ordinary belief paradigm. And that's why I asked Tommy to be here, and Matt, I'm looking forward to getting to know you and more about you, and maybe we'll have you come back here and share your story as well.
That'd be great.
But
yeah, he's got a story.
Yeah, well, and I'd love to hear it. But the thing is that people that are pushing the envelope, because I'm like, I don't care whether or not anybody thinks like me. I don't give a fuck. Because at the end of the day, I've got a great career. I've got a beautiful wife. I've got handsome sons. My life is fucking golden. I don't need anything. I don't need any affirmation or edification from anyone. I'm good
Yeah.
all by myself. But what I do want is for people to simply think, that they engage their brains and consider what it is that they believe. Because if you really think it out,
Mhm.
you'll find that a lot of things that you really believe, you really don't believe them because you believe them. You believe them because somebody told you you should believe them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so
Well said.
Tommy, any parting thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I mean,
Also, tell
yeah,
everybody where they can get in touch with you, and Matt, you can do the same.
yeah. Here, I was actually just about to post a comment with a link to our podcast. Yeah, you can find me. Like, I'm on Facebook. I've actually considered starting doing more like I have a TikTok account, but I don't really use it. I thought maybe I should, start doing stuff like that, or even like doing something more with like our podcast, like as opposed, like in addition to like just the episodes we record, trying to do more like little videos and stuff like that. But yeah, as far as like parting thoughts, kind of something you just mentioned kind of jogged my memory, because I'm like, there's like so many things like that I was like wanting to talk about this evening, because that's part of the thing. Like when something that was like part of your entire life, my faith, that literally defined and explained every part of my life, like when that's gone, it's like, okay, well, now what?
Yeah.
So like I've literally had to, like, not just like what most people talk about, I have to, like, okay, I have to reevaluate the things that I thought were like spiritual experiences before, or things that I thought was like God speaking to me. What was that? But like now, like literally like everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, but one of the things I found out, and I guess as a tease for our podcast, and I think it was our last episode, I think it was episode 9, I talked about like some dreams that I had. Yeah, Matt remembers.
If we still have Christian listeners, they'll be freaked out.
Yeah. Where like there were 2 dreams. I won't go into details, but basically things that before I would have reacted to in a very defined, like, okay, I know exactly what this is and I know exactly what I need to do. Where now it's just like, I'll just say, like, in particular, the second one, where, like I said, I won't go into it, but basically it was one of the worst dreams, like one of the saddest, most like heartbreaking like dreams I've ever had. And I woke up completely shook. Like I was in tears. Where before I was like, and I remember laying there in bed being like, okay, before, like, I would pray right now. But now what?
Yeah.
So then I basically just started talking to myself. And I was like, okay, if I was praying, what would I ask God for? I would want peace. I would want to know that I'm okay. Like all these things. So I just started telling myself, you're okay. And the fact that this dream hit you this way and is making you feel this way, like, that's real. Because it basically had to do with like contemplating like my own death, kind of coming off having cancer. Like man, it may sound like kind of a duh thing, but like really, like contemplating your own death gets old really fast.
Yeah.
So, but now it's like but then, so yeah, so after like talking to myself like that, I was really like, okay, that worked. So like before, when I was praying and things worked, like what was that? I was like, have I just been talking to myself this whole time?
Bingo.
And it kind of hit me as like, yeah. So, and then, yeah. But yeah, so just completely rebuilding my whole worldview. And just real quick, probably where I've landed at the moment, if you're familiar with the term optimistic nihilism.
Yeah.
For that, yeah, it's basically, for people who don't know, so the nihilism part is, okay, there is no ultimate purpose, But the optimistic part is that means that you can make your own. You have the freedom. I don't have to be constantly like every day thinking, okay, what would God want me to do right now? What does God think of this choice? Is this sin? Should I be confessing this? If I do confess, like, how should I be? It's like, no, just all of that, just, forget that. It's all about, what's inside me. Like, what do I want? And what I want, starters, like, I want, so I'm kind of stripping everything away. Like, okay, I want to be a good husband, be a good father. My wife and my kids are like the most important people in my life. Like, that's what I want to focus on. And then past that, okay, what's good for us and what's good for the people who are in my life? What's good for the people I care about? What's good for humanity, which I obviously care about, being a human, or the earth I'm on. Like, I want it to be a good place, So I don't have to have that extra layer of, well, would God approve? Like, what does he really want? Because, like, you start going down that road of like, what does God really want? It's like, it goes back to divine hiddenness. No one really knows.
Right.
It's codependent too.
Yes, very. Yeah, and that's one thing. Like, say Matt's like really good at. Like, if you listen to the podcast, like, he's really good at looking at the whole like more psychological angle of a lot of like Christianity and church things can be extremely negative, but yeah, I'd say like between the two of us, like, I actually kind of found it kind of funny, like when you were talking about having me on, and you're just saying, I want to have Tommy on because he just like seems like he's so much more compassionate, and you're talking about yourself, like, I can be like more of an asshole. It's like, I kind of feel like between like the two of like me and Matt, like, I'm a bit more of the asshole. Like, so if you think I'm like thoughtful and compassionate, I think Matt's like even way more so. So I will just want to close with just like one little anecdote, if you will, from one of my interactions with Derrick. I keep forgetting my name. But
yeah, the bearded guy with glasses.
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah, this is weird all of a sudden.
So, but speaking of the whole thing, like, okay, I got my diagnosis, got prayed for, then things got worse. One of the things that happened before things got better, speaking of like my interactions with Derrick, this was after my first visit to the hospital, after they found like the growth in my heart. Like, I had a post on Instagram, and Derrick responded like sending healing vibes my way, and it was literally like very shortly after you sent that, things started looking up. So and then, but yeah, so don't talk to yourself like don't think of yourself as an asshole like that. Because another one of my favorite things, one of our very first interactions, you were talking about like being like an asshole for hire or something, like something you used to say. I even like message you like, hey, what's your rate? If you could like come over to my church or something and set some people straight on some shit. And you're just like, and I remember you said, I'll be an asshole for free if it helps people see. I said, and that's why you're not really an asshole.
Thanks, Tommy. I'm humbled by that. Matt, you any closing thoughts?
I'm rarely on Facebook. If I am, it's in spurts.
Yeah. I always know when Matt's on, because they're like my notifications just like light up for like pages.
But I do get involved in conversations on Heretic Happy Hour. No, Heretic After Hours.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on there so often. That's how I know. I think I'm really gelling with a few things that you guys have said, especially I think where I am right now is I don't really care what somebody believes as long as it's good for them. And as long as they're asking themselves, is this good for me? And they're asking that about everything, including what they think of God, whether or not God exists or not. I really would enjoy helping people see what's good for them. And if that means if where they are, if that's a new phase in whatever they believe, that's cool. But I haven't seen anybody yet like their healthiest place is stopping somewhere, and not going to the next healthiest thing.
Yeah.
So maybe that means I like turn people into atheists. I don't know.
You know, that's people accuse me of proselytizing for atheism. I say you don't proselytize for atheism. All you do is present the facts, and let people come to their own conclusions. You know,
Yeah.
because you don't become an atheist. It's like it's almost like you're panning for gold. It's like you just kind of stumble into it.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah,
but
and that's something like as I've like presented like where you want to call them arguments or just my thoughts on things. Because like at first I want to be like very cautious, like, okay, I don't want to, you know, like Matt said, like I don't want to be like taking anything away from anybody. Like if they're happy with they're at, where they're at, then, you know, fine. I still want to, you know, be honest with where I'm at. But then I got to think about like, can I really take that away from someone? Like if all I'm doing is just expressing how I see things, I kind of view it as like, it's like they have a house and like their beliefs is like a dog or something in their house. If all I'm doing is like opening a window here, saying, hey, have you thought about this? Or opening a door, like if that dog gets out, it's because it wanted to get out.
yeah.
But if it's fine staying in the house, even though I'm opening like all these doors and windows, and okay, fine, that's what they want.
Yep.
So
But like, yeah, I don't have that power to actually take someone's belief away from them.
Nope.
So I still want to try to be nice about it, I guess, but when I can. But
So before we go, I just want to tell everybody, Tommy, thank you for joining me today. Look forward to having you on again because you're a really great guest. I love talking to you, Matt. I'm looking forward to having you on as a guest and having you unpack some of your thoughts because I can kind of see, you know, there's a lot going on up here that
there's too much.
That's okay. You'll have your moment, but next Thursday I'm going to have Dr. Michael Thomas on, who is he's a former bishop like myself, and that is now an atheist, and he's very very vocal. He winds up in Facebook jail almost as much as I do. So I have a lot of love for people like that. So make sure you guys tune in for that. But
yeah.
In the meantime, Tommy, again, thank you for joining in. Matt, thank you for chiming in, and I'm looking forward to talking to you guys and getting to know you better. And until the next time, man.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, this was great, Derrick. Glad to finally connect like face to face like this.
Oh yeah, man, this is awesome.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
Really enjoyed it.
And one of the outcomes from this, Tommy, I'm going to announce it on the air. You will have my telephone number, which means that if you have a problem with me, that means you can call me.
All right, I will take advantage.
Well enough you know me well enough to have my number, which means that you can call me with a problem.
All right, I'll be sure to do that. Should I have a problem?
Yep. But I say for everybody else, I flip them the deuces. You know, you're number one on both hands. So anyway, awesome. Guys, take it easy.
Right, you too. Thanks, Derrick.
Yep.